What up, Cucks? It's your boy, the Hater, up in this piece. I've been very busy these last few days, but I figured I'd make some time to do a video. And this video is going to be about, it's going to be about a bunch of things, but it's going to center around an event that has been historically panned by wrestling fans. And that is the short but significant title run of David Arquette. Now, I've come to realize that in recent times, David Arquette has been considered something of a legend of sorts, right? Because he has gone out and he's, tried to wrestle in the indies for no reason. He's very wealthy, but he's done that anyways, right? Wrestling people like Nick Gage or whatever his name was, who sucks, right? Who nearly killed him, and all that. But I'm here to tell you that, in my personal opinion, the David Arquette title reign was great. And not only that, it was indicative of something better, right? And that is the topic of today's video: meaningful title reigns. Now, here's the thing, right? Most title reigns are completely meaningless and throwaway, right? Once in a while, we get meaningful title reigns. How do we know they're meaningful? Number one, the first criterion is they must be memorable, right? And let's be real. If you watch wrestling back then, you remember how he won. You remember the time when he was champion. You remember the events that surrounded it, right? This was the brilliance of Vince Russo back in the day, right? People talk about, Judy Bagwell in a pole match. I remember how Judy Bagwell looked, right? That means this was memorable. Maybe for the wrong reasons, but memorable nevertheless. Now let's compare David Arquette's title reign to, Seth Rollins' current World Heavyweight title reign, right? This will go down as a throwaway title reign that nobody's going to care about, right? Eventually, he's going to drop it meaninglessly to like a Drew McIntyre and AJ Styles, and they too will have a meaningless title reign. Drew McIntyre had a meaningless title reign, and that title reign was centered around WrestleMania. So what exactly is it that makes a title reign good or not, right? Certainly, it's not fan perception, right? Because the fans forget about these things, right? Something has to be good has to be considered good, I should say, if people talk about it years down the line, right? Now, oftentimes, bad things are talked about years down the line. The Holocaust obviously wasn't a good thing, but people still talk about it today. So it's not dispositive that everything that gets talked about is going to be good. However, within the context of wrestling, it's true more often than not. Now, David Arquette was, not so much anymore, let's be real, he was a bona fide celebrity back then. He was like, I wouldn't say an A-lister, but he was like a B-plus lister, right? He was in mainstream Hollywood movies, and he had a connection to wrestling, right? He was in that wrestling movie, I think it was called Ready to Rumble, which was actually pretty good. I personally like it a lot, right? With, Scott Conn, James Caan's kid, right? The movie was great. I've watched it several times as a kid. I really enjoyed it. It really captured the neck beardiness of a fan, right? So it's actually really strange that in the movie, Arquette plays basically like a neckbeard, right? Who actually makes it. So this should be like every neckbeard's favorite movie. But of course not, because it didn't have Kota Ibushi in it. But that's neither here nor there, right? The underpinnings of David Arquette's title reign were clear from the beginning, right? It wasn't presented as if it were a legitimate title reign, right? It wasn't presented as if he earned it, right? It was presented as the opposite. It was presented as if he didn't earn it and that it was a fluke, right? So people forget that in the context, right? I can't believe you booked him to be champion. Why not? Why not? So what? It's unbelievable? It's unbelievable to me that Daniel Bryan can beat Batista, right? But we accept that, right? Oh, but David Arquette winning like a fluke match, that's way more believable. You know what I mean? So with that being said, let's look at some title reigns in the current era that are completely meaningless, right? And I'm going to focus on some that have been injected with meaning artificially. A great example would be Gunther's Intercontinental title reign, right? I don't care if this guy holds the belt for 10 years. I'm sick and tired of hearing how every time someone has a long Intercontinental title reign, they're bringing back meaning and prestige to the title. Well, if this has been happening since Cody Rhodes was Intercontinental champion before he was Stardust, then why is it that every other champion that has the title must restore prestige to it, right? I thought Cody Rhodes restored prestige to it when he brought out the white belt or whatever, right? You know what I mean? Every single time something happens, every time someone wins the mid-card titles, they're bringing back prestige to them. Oh, Lashley brought back prestige to the U.S. title. No, he didn't. Nobody cares about it, right? Oh, Gunther brought out brought prestige to the Intercontinental title. No, he didn't. I don't even know that he's champion 90% of the time. I forget. I'm like, who's the Intercontinental champion? Oh, it's Gunther, because he doesn't even, like, it's not even part of like his character, right? He has these title defenses, which are like sloppy matches against people that are better than him, like Chad Gable, and I'm supposed to be impressed or something, right? Now compare that to, you know, a lot of other meaningful title reigns, right? Like, for example, Hornswoggle being like Cruiserweight champion for like a day, right? That's a huge deal because Hornswoggle is obviously a little person, and that's something that you're gonna remember that. I remember him like beating Chavo and everybody else with a little tadpole splash, right? I remember these things. I remember China being Intercontinental champion. I remember China being women's champion, right? These are the memorable title reigns. Like, let me ask you this. Who did Gunther beat for the Intercontinental title, right? I'm sure most of you have to think about it. And it's not because it was a long time ago. No, you have to think about it because it was meaningless. Because whoever, I can't even think about it right now. Whoever was the previous champion was a jobber. That's why. I don't even know who it was. It could have been John Cena for all I care. And it doesn't matter. They would be demoted to jobber because there's no way that this was meaningful. Their title reign was complete nonsense. And then, what's his face? Gunther became Intercontinental champion, right? If you can't remember who was the previous champion, that means that the entire title reign is immaterial in most cases because you cannot bring prestige to something if the guy that had it before you is so irrelevant and your match with that person is so irrelevant that nobody cared, right? Big and important intercontinental and other title matches must happen at big, important junctures. They must have a big and important story, right, that drives and fuels the feud, right? You cannot remember who the champion was. Look at Roman Reigns, for example. You remember that he beat Drew McIntyre for the WWE title, and you remember that he got the Universal title from Braun Strowman and Bray Wyatt, rest in peace, right? You remember this because the moment felt big, because everyone knew that it was time for Roman Reigns to start something great, right? To pick up where he left off. And for people like Braun Strowman and Bray Wyatt to go back to being jobbers, right? Everybody knew that was going to happen. So it was memorable. I remember the match. He came out late, speared them, and won, right? They beat each other up, and he came out like in the middle of the match and picked up the leftovers, right? I remember these things, right? Even something as simple as the first Universal Champion, the Finn Balor one, I remember that, right? I have to rack my brain to think that, oh, AJ Styles and Seth Rollins were in the finals of the World Heavyweight title. I have to think about it very hard, right? Because it's completely meaningless, right? Who were the tag team champions in either brand when the Usos became tag team champions? I don't remember. At all, right? I don't remember at all because it's completely meaningless, right? The titles are so meaningless that I don't remember the last champion. There was a point when I was a young wrestling fan that I could pretty much trace the lineage of the Intercontinental title all the way up to when D'Lo Brown had both it and the European title. That's when I started watching wrestling. I could trace it so easily because everything was either meaningful or it was part of like a hot potato between, like, let's say Jericho, Benoit, and Angle or something, right? That's fine too. This idea that the mid-card titles must be held with some prestige and regard is absurd. The only way that works is if the person who's Intercontinental champion uses it as a stepping stone. And we haven't seen that being done since ever, right? I've never seen it being done in the near 30 years I've been watching wrestling, right? I haven't seen it once. Apparently it happened back in the day with like Ultimate Warrior and stuff, but that was before my time. I don't remember the last time when there was an Intercontinental champion that challenged for the world title, right? Maybe you can make the argument like Cena with a U.S. title. When he became champion, that was like kind of a big deal because he was the U.S. champion and the feud started with him as U.S. champion. And then eventually he became world champion by beating JBL. But that's the only example that I can think of, right? Everything else is just like, oh, the Intercontinental champion is completely meaningless and has been for 30 years. And nothing comes of it when you win it, right? So with that being said, how can you tell me out here in these woods, how can you tell me that David Arquette's meaningful and memorable title reign is somehow bad, and I'm supposed to believe that Nakamura's third IWGP title reign is important? No, it isn't. Nobody cared about it. It didn't move the needle 1 second, right? At the end of the day, David Arquette was someone that was relevant, more famous than every wrestler had ever been up until that point, right? Except for maybe Stone Cold and The Rock. But even then, it was close. You know what I mean? And of course, Hogan, right? And there's a few wrestlers, I guess, that were more famous than David Arquette, but not many, So him winning makes perfect sense, right? And when Vince Russo says he would do it again, I firmly believe him and I firmly support it because you have to inject meaning into feuds. You have to think about it this way, right? When someone like David Arquette wins the title, or someone like Vince Russo wins the title, or someone like Vince McMahon wins the title, right? The automatic question that needs to be asked is, how quick are they going to drop it? Probably almost immediately. And who's going to take it from them, right? I remember there was a throwaway episode of, I think, Raw. It might have been SmackDown, who knows, right? Where someone named Harvey Whippleman, I don't know who he is, but I remember him because it was memorable, right? He dressed up as Hervina Whippleman, and he joined some sort of women's match where he became the women's champion, right? Shortly thereafter, like 1 week or one episode later, maybe it happened on Raw, and the next SmackDown, the next time there was TV, the women had like a random draw. Jacqueline won, and she squashed Harvey Whippleman and became the women's champion. That was memorable. Why? Is it because Harvey Whippleman is a great women's champion? Absolutely not. It's because he's not. It's because the storyline was this person that isn't supposed to win won. I remember, like, you could put a gun to my head, right? And like, I'll tell you, the beautiful people were, Impact Tag Team Champions. The only other team I remember are ODB and Eric Young, right? I remember it because it was unique. It was different, right? You remember the things that stand out. You don't remember meaningless title reigns. Was Madison Rayne a 3-time champion or a 4-time champion? The answer is, who cares, right? Nobody knows. Nobody cares. Most of the title reigns were meaningless. Same thing with Angelina Love. Same thing with Velvet Sky. Same thing with Gail Kim. Nobody cared at all, right? And that's what I'm getting at. In order for something to be good, it must be memorable and people must care. Now, wrestling is designed in such a way where if bad people win, you still are supposed to care, right? And you can't tell me that nobody cares that David Arquette won the title, right? Everyone cares. Everyone got pissed. That was the intended consequence. It wasn't supposed to be like, oh, now you accept David Arquette as the real champion, and this makes perfect sense. No, it was meant to aggravate the fan. It was meant to belittle the world title, right? The storyline was such that the world title was being belittled. Now, in my opinion, this automatically elevates the world title, right? Because the argument is, wait a second, David Arquette's a champion. All the wrestlers should want a piece of him. Maybe he'll wrestle Evan Courageous, and Evan Courageous will be the champion because he's Evan Courageous and he's a wrestler. David Arquette isn't, right? Now, obviously it's not going to happen, but you understand what I'm getting at, right? The question automatically becomes, what's next? That's what makes good wrestling. The question of what's next. Why do you think the Raw after WrestleMania is so popular? Because WrestleMania leaves you with the ultimate questions of what's next, right? Wait a second. The new guy that won the Royal Rumble, Cody Rhodes, just got screwed by Solo Sikoa. What's next, right? Everyone watches Raw to find out what's next. If nothing happens, right? If it's a meaningless, end to WrestleMania, then nobody asks what's next and nobody watches, right? This is what happens when Gunther's champion, when Seth Rollins is champion, and when most people nowadays are champions, right? Nobody asks what's next. When Booker T came to WCW in the very, very underrated Invasion angle, every week the question was, what's next? So don't tell me that, they didn't do it well because they didn't get, a Goldberg. Who cares? It doesn't matter. The point wasn't about the stars versus the stars. The point was WCW is now in WWE. That was a dream come true if you were a fan back then. So, and it was memorable, right? Now, some people got pushed, some people didn't. It doesn't really matter. The point was that you have to make memorable TV. And quite frankly, Seth Rollins as World Heavyweight Champion is not memorable. Gunther as Intercontinental Champion is not memorable. Whoever the hell is the U.S. Champion, Austin Theory, I don't even know who it is. I have no idea. Not memorable. It's actually Rey Mysterio. But it's still, I love Rey Mysterio, but this is not memorable, right? Him feuding with Santos Escobar in these friendly matches is not memorable. It's boring, right? Nobody wants to see it. Nobody wants to see him and Lashley. So what I'm getting at here is this, right? David Arquette, memorable. Everyone else that I mentioned, not memorable. And that's that, motherfucks.